Opened up my Nitty Gritty and just a short video. This is the motor. So there's a slot at the top where your felt lips go, and you would put the record, and it spins up on top. So I'm looking at the bottom, and I have the bottom plate removed, but it's still wired at this point. So this is like a seal that goes up against the inside of the housing, and I don't know if was supposed to be actual glue or it's just supposed to be sitting there. Anyway, the motor and the vacuum housing are sort of embedded in this foam block, and the foam block slides into these two metal plates. It's kind of, I don't want to do it with one hand because I don't want to knock the whole thing over. So the reason I took this apart was because I've been cleaning records forever, and nothing ever comes out this little hole in the bottom, which is accessed through one of these two holes. The other hole had a plastic grid over it. It's where the fan exhausts. So this is the bottom side here. Nitty Gritty 1.0, model number 20364, or serial number 20364. So this hole here is where this little drain plug, there's a rubber stopper that goes in it, and then this had a plastic grid on it. That's where the fan motor exhausts. So the thing that mystifies me about the design is where all the junk goes, it gets sucked off the record, because basically nothing ever comes out of this little hole when I use it. Sometimes I'll see stuff dripping out of this main hole, which is where the exhaust grid was, but pretty much nothing ever drips out of there. So two aspects to that. One of them is, of course, the dirt that gets sucked off the record. Where does it go? It's a little bit for any record, but I've been cleaning records for years with this thing, and I never get anything out the bottom. And likewise, fuzz and cat fur and all the other stuff that gets sucked off the record, it gets sucked into the vacuum, but I never see it come out. So I finally decided to open it up. And the other thing is that I use a mixture of water and isopropyl alcohol and some surfactants for my record cleaning solution, and those surfactants are basically not volatile. So at room temperature, they're just never going to evaporate. So that solution is getting sucked into this Nitty Gritty, and the water and the isopropyl alcohol will evaporate off, but where does the other stuff go? So finally decided today, since I had the lips off anyway, to replace them, to just open this thing up and try and rinse it out and see what's going on. And so one thing I noticed is the way they've got it wired. So these two wires go to the switch, and this white wire is the neutral. So they're switching the neutral, which is my understanding is not what you're supposed to do, because that leaves the motor hot all the time. Anyway, when I put it back together, I'm going to reverse those. And then the other thing is that, so I've been using my wet dry shop vac and spraying water in through it was spraying in through the slot where the lips go, but then I finally just took the thing apart and started spraying it inside. But I don't know if we can see very clearly in here, but there's like all this, there's a huge thing of basically lint, like wet lint in there, that I've been trying to retrieve with these grippers. And so at this point, I don't really understand. The thing's basically made to never be taken apart. It's all bonded together in this giant, integral unit. And as best I can tell, the motor exhausts, the unit exhausts all the junk right through the motor. I don't really understand. It sucks in here and it blows out through the motor, which is means that it's all the, all the junk that's supposed to be evacuated from this thing as you're cleaning the records is being blown through the motor, which is a very odd design, if you ask me. So anyway, I'm going to unwire these wire nuts, and I'm going to take this thing apart a little more so I can stop getting the box wet, and see what more I can learn about all the junk inside the vacuum housing. Alright, I've got this motor completely removed, and now that I've got it turned around, I can see there's 3 holes on the backside that are presumably where it exhausts. It doesn't exhaust through the motor. So, at least I think. I don't know, the motor is still just full of funk, which to me says that there's some sort of issue there. And these holes, I don't know, they don't look very dirty to me, so but anyway, the main issue remains. Nothing was coming out of this thing as I was using it, and there's a whole bunch of junk inside. So I've got it removed, and I'm going to try and just flush it out and then dry the motor off. I'm going to flush it out with a whole bunch of water and then dry the motor off and put it back together. So here you can see I've got the water running through this thing backwards, and it's all this foam is from the surfactants in my cleaning, but you can also see a lot of water running out through the motor side. So, this is supposed to be the exhaust for the vacuum when it's running. It's sucking air in through this from the lips on top of the unit where the record's spinning around, sucking air in here, and it's supposed to be exhausting in here, but there's just as much exhaust coming out the motor side. And the worst of it is just being trapped in there forever. So, I really like this unit, but I don't really understand what they expected to have happen in the long term using it, because stuff is going to get sucked in. That's the whole idea. It's a vacuum. And there's no real good way for it to come out. So I'm just going to try and clean this, and like I mentioned before, there's a whole bunch of fuzz and lint and stuff in cat fur or whatever from all these records that I've cleaned over the years. It's in there in a big knot, and I've got to try and figure out how to get that out. Well, this is, I don't know what we've got going on here. This is not like a giant lint ball. This is something that was either put in there as a filter or what. I don't really understand. Noise suppression. It looks like the edge of this stuff here, but I don't really get what it is. I think that's the end of that fuzz, but you can see how, I don't know if you can see in there, but the stuff is filthy coming out of there. And I've got the wet dry shop vac trying to suck the water out. Look at this. Something in there. I'm getting ready to put the Nitty Gritty back together. That's the underside of the case with 2 wires from the switch, which I had labeled before I took apart, even though I'm not going to wire it back up the way it was. And it was wired with the switch on the black wire, the live wire, the phase wire, whatever people call it. Or no, it was wired on the neutral and not on the phase wire. So I'm going to wire it on the live. I'm going to put that switching line on the black with the plug, and I'll show you that in a minute. So those 2 metal guides are where the foam block slides in, and then you can see where the suction part meets the case, and I don't have any plans to try and adhere that to it. It didn't seem to be stuck to it before. It just seemed to be like pressed in place. So I don't know what the original deal was with it, but it's been working, so I'm just going to leave it. If I get it back together and seems like things aren't working right, then maybe I'll take it apart and seal the inlet of the vacuum housing to that spot there. I sprayed the motor out with this plastic safe electronics cleaner, and it's been sitting in front of the fan with the dehumidifier here for a while, so hopefully it's dried up and out. I'm getting a little bit impatient to get it back together, but it feels dry for the most part. It's not entirely dry, but we'll see. So there's the suction part of the vacuum housing. That's that circle there is where it sits, and then this foam block is just going to slide into the guides like that, and it's held in place, not really pressed in place, but held in place by the bottom panel, which is just hardboard. It's not made out of the finest materials, but you know, if it was $500, I wouldn't have bought it in the first place. And I really have no idea what all the junk was that I got out of it, and I have a feeling it's supposed to be some sort of seal that was supposed to keep the motor from exhausting through the motor like it does. But anyway, I just took all that stuff out and I'm going to put it back together and see what happens. So I've got the black, neutral, and green. I'm going to switch to black. These wires leading into the motor are not going to matter unless I'm really mistaken which is which, and then the ground. So I'll put it back together and we'll see what happens. I've got it wired. Before I button it up, I'm going to show you how I wired it. So there's a switch. The black wire from the wall goes into the switch. So the hot wire is switched, and then when the switch is on, power comes to the motor, returns through the other wire, through the neutral, back to the bus bar and the panel, and here's the ground is connected. So I'm switching the hot wire. The black comes in from the panel. That's the one you don't want to touch. It gets switched right away. So when the switch is off, there's no power to any of this stuff. That's not how it was before. And maybe it doesn't really matter. It had a ground anyway, but at least now when the switch is off, the power stops there rather than somewhere in the motor.